In this case, the guy was in a rent-controlled apartment. He was renting it for triple what he was paying. Clearly, he was abusing the rent-controlled situation that he was in. It's just funny to watch this play out in our industry right now.
Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University in the News. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jeff, I'm pretty good. Jennifer brought us another great article, and it's something that we've kind of been waiting to see, and it finally happened. So it's an article on Airbnb and a recent judge's decision in New York City. It was considered a landmark decision, and so I'm excited to jump into it today. So, Jennifer, how'd you find it? And let's jump right in.
Well, hi, everyone. Of course, once again, Airbnb is in the news. This was pretty big news a couple of weeks ago in this landmark court decision. What happened was a Manhattan housing court judge had evicted a tenant who was using his rent-controlled luxury apartment as a source of income using Airbnb. What happened was the tenant was renting out the apartment for almost triple of what he was paying in rent. And of course, tenants who make a fortune on discounted rental properties are just one area that a lot of these different groups have been focusing on, like building owners and landlords. They're using this case certainly to cite for future cases and the ramping up opposition. And they're claiming that they're going to go after anyone who's not using their apartment properly and violating the laws that are set up to establish rental properties versus hotels. The article, it does point out that the attorney who did win this case reported that he received dozens of phone calls and emails from other landlords who are in similar situations within just a few hours of that court decision. I thought it was interesting also, they cited a statistic that said recent reports show that nearly 75% of Airbnb's New York City listings are in fact illegal. So I think this is just the beginning of the court action against Airbnb.
Yeah, and it's funny just sort of watching how this is all playing out and seeing in the industry the impact and what trends are sort of emerging because of it. And there's two sides to it. So the other day I was on LinkedIn and I saw three articles that were about specifically geared towards landlords or property owners and how to make money using Airbnb and things like that. So there's sort of this one side of it, I think, from a landlord's perspective that it could be good, and then on the other side of it, there's an element, especially when you're talking about rent control, things like that, where you have the potential to get into a real dangerous realm with it and walk the fine line of right and wrong. In this case, with the story that they brought, the guy was in a rent controlled apartment. He was renting it for triple what he was paying. Clearly, he was abusing the rent controlled situation that he was in. But it's just funny to watch this sort of play out in our industry right now.
The thing with Airbnb is it makes a lot of sense. It's a great option for people who want to rent when they are traveling. But if you're a landlord and you're renting your property out to somebody, you're assuming that that's the person who's going to be living there. And for somebody else to be essentially subletting your property and making money off of it is crazy. Whether it's rent controlled or not, it just doesn't make sense. And certainly this one makes a lot of sense for the legal system to be able to go after because it is a rent stabilized unit. And so this tenant is getting a discount. They're paying $6,670 a month. And the market value is $9,000. So they're paying less than market value to that landlord because of the rent stabilization. So it makes a ton of sense. Kick the guy out, and move on. He's renting this place out on Airbnb for $649 a night. And if he were to rent it out every night of the month, that would be about, over $19,000. So he could make some pretty good money. I mean, even if he only rents it out half the time, he's just about covering his rent and making profit off of somebody else's property. When we were talking before we started recording, Jennifer was mentioning, it makes sense for cities to start to rein this in and control it, since so many of the Airbnb rentals in New York, or at least in New York City, are illegal. Whereas in San Francisco, I'm down the road, but they have a law in place that starts to regulate this. It limits the amount of time each month or each year that a particular unit can be rented. And I would think, and I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at it, but I would think that they're also making sure that they have the authority from the property owner so that you don't have these types of situations where tenants are renting out properties.
You're 100% right. In San Francisco, they're actually compiling a registry of properties, of Airbnb properties, so that landlords know what's going on. I think, again,
Great.
we've said this over and over. It's landlords' right and responsibility to make money with their properties, not the tenant's right and responsibility to make money off of someone else's hard work and investment and things like that. So I think San Francisco is definitely the template for how some of these bigger cities need to handle it.
Certainly seems like it.
Yeah, and for these articles that are geared towards landlords making money and doing it, I think there's a right way for sure. And um, what's emerging now to protect landlords to make sure that their tenants aren't doing this and abusing Airbnb and subletting their properties. We're seeing a lot of sites pop that I ran across. Spoke to the owner of the site. It was called subletbuster.com. And these are sites that basically search the Airbnb and alike to make sure that your property is not being listed on there. And so there's a lot of, like I said, a lot of emerging businesses coming from this issue right now. And it's definitely, 70%. To Jennifer, and you mentioned that number in New York City, that's such a huge number. I mean, the impact that this is going to have is going to be, a big one and going to be around for a while.
Another interesting little tidbit on this, the building was also receiving a 421A tax exemption, which means that in addition to everything else, they weren't paying as many taxes. So
Right.
the government definitely wants to be sure that these things are being handled properly. And if they have an opportunity to get their taxes, they can, and they should.
Yeah, I think it's gonna come out, and hopefully the legislation supports it, where there's a right way to use these type of services, and then identifying the wrong way and protecting landlords against that.
It's interesting because the goal here is we're advocates for landlords. We certainly try to look at both sides of the issues that we talk about. One of the other interesting things about this article is that this guy who got evicted didn't live there.
Hmm.
He lives in a $1 million plus home in Queens, and just uses that apartment for extra income. So he has a rent controlled apartment that he's just using for extra income. That's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. So yeah, I could see the crackdown on this, and it was also interesting. The article mentioned that the attorney who was working on this case, I mean, he's going to be flooded with calls from landlords saying, "Hey, I've got the same issue. Help me out here." So I think, again, this is going to be something we're going to keep hearing a lot about, and as cases like this continue to pop up and decisions being made, I think it's going to shape how each city is handling this new trend of subletting on places like Airbnb.
Absolutely. Well, Jennifer, let's move upstate into Buffalo and talk about our next topic.
Sure. This article comes from Buffalo, New York, and they have implemented a plan to help tenants who are in poorly managed or even dangerous properties this winter by setting up what's called a receivership system. Of course, that neck of the woods has experienced some awesome winter weather the last several years. And
Yeah.
what this means is if a tenant's rental property has something wrong that could endanger someone's life, like, for example, a non working furnace, a broken water pipe, a leaking roof, something like that, the receiver will collect the rent and then manage the property, including any repairs, until the home is in compliance again. The receiver could also close down the property, help tenants relocate, whatever's needed to ensure the health and safety of tenants. This receivership system is being so successfully executed that they're starting to use it for code violations that are problems that aren't really life threatening or dangerous, but things like snow removal. So I thought it was an interesting take on it. It's a solution that forces the landlords to act quickly, or they could lose their tenants and even their properties. And it helps tenants who are in a bad situation to get that immediate help that maybe a lazy landlord wouldn't
Hmm.
be able to step in and do. So currently, the article says there are more than 300 properties that are in receivership, and more are expected as the longer, worse winter weather continues. So I was curious what you guys thought of this type of system.
So, being from Buffalo, I can tell you that Buffalo is somewhat of a unique area for real estate investors. I had a buddy who came here not too long ago from California, and he bought a house in Buffalo, and the house was maybe 180. It was under 200,000, I know for sure. And he was shocked that he was able to buy a house so inexpensive. He said, back in California, this would have been a million plus. We have such a unique area for the in the real estate market, and in a lot of the depressed areas you can buy houses for a couple $1,000s, and so especially for out of town investors, um, they're buying up properties like crazy. And so what's happening here is you have large areas, usually in depressed neighborhoods, that are being mismanaged because you have absentee landlords. And anytime that you have an absentee landlord, you're going to run into problems. So we have a lot of out of town investors, out of country investors, people who just think, wow, a house for $25,000, I've got to buy it. Where else are you going to be able to do that, and be able to rent it out? So I could see where the problem, how it happened and how it got to this point. And I love the approach that the city's taken. This idea of a receivership where they're going to take the rent and apply that towards fixing the things that need to be fixed, and eventually moving the absentee landlord out of that, out of the picture. And I think that's a great thing. Otherwise, we're going to be in a similar situation than you see with Detroit or a lot of the other sort of rust belt cities, that some of the areas are just horribly depressed economically because you have so many vacant properties, and same type of issues where it just gets to the point that you can't even, the houses are inhabitable and entire neighborhoods are just left vacant.
You talk about some of the things we've talked about in the past, like blight and things like that. It does make sense because if you allow it to start, it's the old broken window theory. Once it starts to go down that path, then the community, that neighborhood, kind of starts to go downhill. There needs to be some way of keeping that from happening. But first and foremost, they talked about the sub-zero weather being one of the major things that they focused on, making sure that people had proper heating and had water and all of the basic necessities to live. And if a landlord is not providing those basic necessities and addressing them within a reasonable manner, then the city, I can't argue with them for
Hmm.
putting a program like this together. What they found, according to the article, is that as soon as you start to take people's money away, they get on top of the problem and they get it taken care of. And so just, I think, by the threat of putting these properties into receivership, they've been able to get a lot of problems taken care of to take care of the tenants. Because yes, we are advocates for the landlords, but at the same time, we're advocates for landlords properly running their business so that they're providing a good home to their tenants.
Absolutely. And you look at it in the case where if it's a landlord that does care, they're not going to want to face any penalties. They're going to want to get in there and fix what's wrong and do what's right. Um, and for the landlords that don't care, a lot of the absentee landlords, this is a way for them to, still preserve those properties and to not let them continue to slide into disrepair where, it's beyond the point of fixing. And so I feel like this is a really good program that will pay dividends in the long term.
Absolutely. And if you're a landlord in a neighborhood that has a lot of rental properties, you want the other rental properties around you to be in good shape. Especially if you're taking good care of your property and your tenant, you want the others around you to take care of theirs because you want the value of your property to at least be stable, if not increase over time. In addition to having the opportunity to rent to people that want to live in your neighborhood and the type of people that you want to rent to. If the neighborhood goes downhill, then that changes your tenant avatar, and that's not what you want.
Right now, Jennifer, I didn't see it mentioned in the article at all, and I don't know if you would know this, but is Buffalo the only city that has a program like this?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. This one just sort of popped up on the radar
Mhm.
hand in hand with the awful weather that's been going on lately. But I could actually look into that and see. I'm sure if it's a successful model, that other cities in similar situations wouldn't hesitate to set
Right.
something up.
Yeah, it's interesting. Buffalo's not usually known as, the city that passes great things and everyone else jumps onto it. That's why I'm wondering if this is something they come up with. If it is, it's fantastic. I hope other cities do jump onto it. Like I said, I feel like it's one of the few good programs I could see out there. And if you're a good landlord, you're doing things right. This isn't anything that you probably would have to be concerned about. But if you're not paying attention, and not keeping up with your properties and not giving your tenants the basic necessities of what they need, then you're gonna end up in a bad situation with the city, and as you should.
The last item in this article says if a landlord isn't responding to housing complaints, Buffalo residents can call 311 and ask for a housing inspector. So if you are a landlord in Buffalo, and I'm sure there are other cities that use the 311 system for that type of thing, the last thing you want is the city contacting you
Yeah.
with problems that your tenant has raised. So first and foremost, make sure your tenants have good contact information for you so that you're sure to get their calls when they have problems and they don't go to the city first.
Yeah, that's usually the last letter you want to get is anything addressed from the city. And yeah, you would hope that through good communication, you'd be able to identify any issues, broken pipe. Again, and if you're managing your property correctly, those should be things you're on top of right away.
Yes, very much so. Well, great, Stephen and Jennifer. Thank you guys both very much. Look forward to talking to you again next week.
All right, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University, and remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit podcast at thementorimpact.com.